Hello everybody, I'm Richard Holder and welcome to the channel. Who likes 5-liter Ford Mustang engines? Who wants to make more power? That's really basically everybody. Well, who wants to make 600 horsepower from your boosted 5-liter? In this video, we're going to take a look at two different ways to exceed 600 horsepower from your typical heads cam intake 5-liter Ford. We have two different NA combinations. We also have two different forms of forced induction. On one combination, we have a turbo. On the other combination, we have a Torqstorm centrifugal supercharger. You know, different strokes for different folks. We're going to take a look at a pair of actually 600 horsepower 5-liter Ford combinations. And then actually they're two different NA motors and two different forms of forced induction. But as you can see from this discussion, we'll talk about the fact that if you take a 302, whether it's a Ford Explorer, like a more modern one, or the early 5-liter stuff, whatever it is, some kind of 302 base motor, and you put the a good set of heads, aftermarket heads, airflow research, in this case we'll use RHS and trick flow, and you put a decent sized camshaft in it to the 274 cam, like a 224, 232, and the right kind of intake manifold, you're going to be somewhere near 400 horsepower. In some cases you might be a little over, a little under, but that's kind of a good idea of where it's going to be in terms of NA modifications on a typical 5-liter. So this was our modified 5-liter NA combination before we added boost to it. And we'll go ahead and take a look at the test description here. It was a 302. This particular one had forged pistons in it because we had built the bottom end on it. But we had run flat top pistons with valve reliefs in it. We upgraded this thing with, in steps actually, and there's a video up on the step-by-step upgrade of this motor, because we started out with the stock HO stuff, and then we went all the way up to this modified combination. But in its final configuration, we ran the Extreme Energy 274 camshaft in it, which is like a 555, 565 lift, 224, 232 degree duration. It's like 112 or 113 degree lobe separation angle. I'll go ahead and put it up here. We had a set of ported RHS 215 cc heads. And again, you can use an airflow research or trick flow on the other one. We use trick flows. But there are lots and lots of good 5-liter heads. I know, because if you take a look at the videos that I have up, there are, I think, 3 different versions of that video. And I think we tested 25 or 30 different available 5-liter Ford heads. And there's even more now than back when I did this test, because those were done long ago. This particular one on the intake side had a HOLLEY SYSTEMAX. It was ported by the guys at Extrude Hone. We had a 75mm throttle body, which honestly I think is holding this combination back. We had 1 5/8 headers. And so run in this configuration with the HOLLEY HP management system, this combination produced 395 horsepower at the power peak and 380 foot-pounds of torque. So it did very well. To give you an idea, here's what it started out as with basically the stock 302 before we did all these modifications. So it started out making, on the engine dyno, 260 horsepower and 321 foot-pounds of torque. So after ported heads and cam and intake, that's what it jumped up to, nearly 400 horsepower. So this is a good combination. We'll take a look at combination number 2. This was another modified 5-liter. And you can see this one makes a little bit more peak power and actually makes more torque as well. And this one was up over 400. This one was 407. Peak torque checked in at 397 foot-pounds. And that particular NA combination started out as a Ford Explorer 5-liter from the wrecking yard. And then we added a set of trick flow TFS 11R heads. We also had a matching trick flow long runner intake manifold. I think it was a Street Heat is what it's listed as there. We had a very similar camshaft. It was the trick flow stage 2, which is a 540, 560, 224, 232, and a 112. So very similar to the comp Extreme Energy 274 cam. We had long tube headers on it. This one had roller rockers on it because they came as the part of this trick flow upgrade that we did. And so that particular combination actually made a little bit more power. I think that the intake manifold, the trick flow intake manifold, the long runner deal, showed more torque production than the HOLLEY SYSTEMAX did. And honestly, I think that the trick flow 11R heads are probably a better choice than the RHS CNC ported heads. They were bigger than they needed to be for our combination. But regardless, they're both, a little below 400 and a little above 400. And both these NA combinations are kind of what you're going to expect when you do a heads, cam, and intake upgrade on a 302. Now let's find out what happens when we add boost. Now that we've taken a look at our two NA combinations, I want to show you what they do under boost. I want to show you the comparison between NA and boost for each one of them, and then we'll compare the boosted ones, and you guys can kind of take a look and see what the difference is between the different kinds of forms of forced induction. So this was our modified 302 with the HOLLEY SYSTEMAX and the RHS heads and the extreme energy camshaft. Here's what happened when we put a single turbo on this thing. So you can see we're making over 600 horsepower, 622 horsepower, 637 foot-pounds of torque. This was actually run with a fairly small 72 millimeter turbo, and for this power level we probably should have picked something a little bit bigger because we did have a falling boost curve. This was at about 10.3 pounds out at the horsepower peak, a little more boost at the torque peak and below because the turbo was able to support that. We had an air-to-air intercooler on this thing, but it was a good combination, and you can see that the turbo was spooled up, obviously, because it's a little bit undersized for this kind of combination, but it spooled up very rapidly, and so we had over 600 foot-pounds for quite a ways on this combination. But let's take a look very quickly and see what happens on our Torqstorm version of the other motor. So we'll take a look at our NA combination. This was our NA motor. Get rid of our fuel here. And so we were making over 400 horsepower. This is with the trick flow combination, the trick flow top end on our Explorer kit. And here's what happened when we added a Torqstorm Supercharger. You can see, again, we made over 600 horsepower in terms of peak. We were up at 635 to 38 horsepower. Peak torque checked in at 545, but you can see we kind of had a rising power gain from the Torqstorm. The centrifugal supercharger improves power as we go up in engine speed because it makes less boost down low and then starts coming into its efficiency range and starts making more boost at the top. In fact, the peak boost occurs at peak RPM unless you either, one, run out of the flow capacity of the supercharger, or you have belt slippage, neither which is beneficial. So now we can compare our curves, our boosted curves of the Torqstorm versus the turbo on these two combinations. Now we're going to take a quick look at the comparison between our turbocharged 5-liter and our Torqstorm supercharged 5-liter, and I know that they're different motors, but this gives you a really good idea of the difference in power curves associated with these different kinds of forced induction. And really more guys are looking for doing, hey, look, I want to build a 600 horsepower 5-liter version. And this shows you two different ways to do it, basically. So this was our turbo combination, making 622 horsepower. Peak torque was 637 foot-pounds. And you can see nice broad curve. It actually looks like basically just a bigger motor, bigger than a 5-liter. And here is our Torqstorm Supercharged modified 302. Again, actually made a little bit more peak power, 637 or 38 compared to 622 for the turbo motor. But you can see it's down through most of the curve, and we're going to take a look at why. It still has good power and good torque. In fact, you could argue that maybe traction would be better on this combination, and then one combination might be less likely to break the fragile 5-liter blocks if you believe in that kind of stuff. But let's take a look, and the reason for the differences in these power curves is because of the difference in the boost curve supplied by each one of these different forms of forced induction. So if we take a look at the boost curves, you can kind of get an idea on what I'm talking about here. So we'll apply our boost curve. This is our turbo. It looks kind of funky here. And this is our centrifugal supercharger. So both of them, at their respective power peaks, were making right at about 10 pounds. So we have 10.2 for the turbo and 10.0 for the centrifugal supercharger. But you can see on the centrifugal supercharger, we started out at about 3 pounds down at 3,200, and we didn't load the turbo down that low, but we were already at basically 12 pounds with the turbo because the turbo, as we talked about, was a little bit undersized anyway. And we didn't have an electronic controller on this, we just had a manual controller. And because the turbo was undersized and we had a manual controller, we had a falling boost curve on that combination. Even if we had an electronic controller, and let's say that we had a consistent 10 pounds all the way across, torque would be down a little bit down low, but we would still have a lot more boost from the slightly undersized turbo than the centrifugal blower, because that's what happens. A centrifugal blower rose from 3 pounds to 10 pounds. The peak boost is going to happen at peak engine speed, basically, whereas the turbo, depending on how you size it, is going to come up, and then if you have a good controller or an electronic controller for your wastegate, you just kind of have a fixed amount of boost going all the way across. They're going to do different things, and it depends on what you want. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay guys, I want you to make a comment. Did we learn from this video the very best form of forced induction? Is that always a turbo? Is it always a centrifugal supercharger? The answer there is no. That doesn't mean I don't want you to comment. In fact, I really do. Which one would you choose? This video is to show you that there are a number of different ways, a bajillion different ways to make power from your 5-liter Ford. We looked at 2 different NA combinations, and basically your typical heads, cam, and intake combination. You're going to put that combination right near the 400 horsepower level. Yeah, there are ways to make more than that, but here's the limiting factor. If you take an Explorer 5-liter short block, or a truck, or a 5-liter, or a T-Bird, whatever it is, and you have stock pistons in it, you are limited with the available piston to valve clearance. You're going to limit it in camshaft. You're going to limit it in the head that you can use. If you put an aftermarket piston in there that has valve reliefs, then hey, the sky's the limit. You can put a big cam, big heads, all of that stuff and make a lot of power. But the reality is, if you're going to make lots of power from a 5-liter, you're going to want to choose some form of forced induction. And is there one that's better than all of the others? No. That's the great thing. If you have a 5-liter Ford or an LS or any kind of motor, you get to choose from all the different forms of forced induction. In this case, we ran a single turbo, and we also ran a Torqstorm centrifugal supercharger. They do different things, so different guys are going to want different things. You can choose from a lot of different things. In the centrifugal supercharger department, you can choose that Torqstorm. You can choose 2 Torqstorms. You can choose a ProCharger or a Vortec or a Paxton. There's lots of different choices. Also, you can choose a lot of different forms of positive displacement superchargers. You got a Kenny Bell, you got a Whipple, you've got any of the number of HOLLEY and YN superchargers. There's a lot of stuff to choose from, and obviously lots of different turbos. Armature Holder, make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. Lots of 5-liter information out there. Lots of videos are up. Make sure to go check them all out. Thanks for watching.